Capital Connection. Governor Pritzker and the Trump administration continue to fight.
He does not have the authority to do the things that he's talked about.
And Illinois is on the road to a clean energy future, but one Democratic lawmaker joins the show to talk about why that road needs some repairs.
Based on all the data available, it appears that we're not going to meet our goals. And if we don't meet our goals, that means that some of these fossil fuel plants might have to keep running.
And the Anti-Defamation League is drawing attention to a growing number of hate crimes in the state and across the country. They say they want law enforcement to help out more.
We have tracked a significant, and not just ADL, but actually the FBI has tracked a significant increase in hate crimes across the country and also here in the state of Illinois.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol reporter Cole Henke is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Cole Henke. This week, the fight between Governor Pritzker and the incoming Trump administration on immigration issues continued as Trump's appointed director of ICE came to Chicago to a GOP event and said that Chicago would be ground zero for mass deportation efforts for the Trump administration. Governor Pritzker responded this week, again questioning the constitutionality of the Trump administration's projected moves. Here's Theodora Coulivaris with more.
He does not have the authority to do the things that he's talked about. Being a border czar is not an official position in the government.
Governor Pritzker took aim at President-elect Donald Trump's new border czar, Tom Homan, after he promised to make Chicago ground zero for mass deportations.
January 21st, we're going to take this country back.
Yeah. Homan served in the first Trump administration as the acting director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He spoke at a Law and Order PAC event in Chicago earlier this week.
I want to be clear. If you're in the country legally, you're not off the table.
Illinois is a sanctuary state, meaning it has policies in place aimed at protecting undocumented immigrants. Illinois also has laws in the books limiting local law enforcement's ability to work with federal immigration officers.
I'm concerned that the Trump administration and his lackeys aren't going to follow the law, but I will.
He's talking about state law, but it's still unclear how federal policies would play out.
Anybody that's here in this country, that's here and has documentation, is here legally, of course I'm obligated to protect them.
But Pritzker also made his position clear on undocumented immigrants who have committed crimes.
Violent criminals who are undocumented and convicted of violent crime should be deported. I do not want them in my state. I do not think they should be in the United States.
Homan's comments have left immigration organizations like the Refugee Center in Champaign with concerns.
What we're trying to do is to keep calm and prepare as best we can for what may be coming. But we don't want to alarm anybody. And we want to minimize the trauma on our clients who have already been through so much.
In other state-related news, we could be getting a new flag. Since 1915, the state has had pretty much the same flag, the same variation of the white backdrop with the state seal. But now, a commission created by the legislature has 10 finalists for a potential new state flag that the people of Illinois are going to get to vote on. This has been the Illinois state flag since 1970, and before then, this was the design since 1915. Now the people of Illinois can actually choose to make a change.
I wanted it to be an opportunity for people to get excited about Illinois again, and for young people, middle-aged people, seniors, everybody. And it really worked. We had 4,844 submissions, which I think is phenomenal.
A commission tasked with helping pick a new state flag narrowed down thousands of submissions to these 10. Now, the people get their chance to vote.
We had to pare those down to 10, which was a yeoman's task, but we did it, and those will be up for the public to vote on which they think is their favorite.
Allowing the public to choose was welcome news for people in Springfield and throughout the state.
Wasn't exciting. I don't know. I thought some options on there really represented Illinois.
And some thought it was a good time for change.
I don't think we need a new state flag, but change is always good. I think there are some really good ones, interesting ones.
The winner of this top 10 vote will get sent along to the General Assembly. Senator Doris Turner initially carried the bill and was happy to see it get to this point.
This exercise doesn't necessarily mean that we will have a new state flag, but, it's possible.
When we come back, we're joined by Democratic Senator Bill Cunningham to talk about issues with the state's clean energy future. We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. In 2021, the state passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, putting the state on a path towards a clean energy future. But now we have some lawmakers, including our next guest, saying there might need to be some maintenance on that road to make sure everybody gets there cleanly. Joining us now is State Senator Bill Cunningham. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start here. You have been pushing this issue now for publicly for a couple of weeks now. You have a new bill that you filed in the State House. It really has to do with energy capacity and bringing in batteries to help with this issue. Take us through the logic here, why you think this would really help avoid some issues that are already, we're starting to see down the line.
Yeah, so you mentioned CEJA, and that's a really good place to start, Cole. Because a lot of assumptions that we made when that passed almost 4 years ago have changed. The energy markets have changed. One of the real game changers is the development of data centers, which are really consuming a growing amount of energy. Illinois is right now third in the nation in the development of data centers, and that is really pulling a lot of power off the grid. So we have to be ready to deal with that. Another issue that's come up more recently is the multi-state grid operators that Illinois is a part of have been raising the prices they charge for power at high demand times, like in the summer when it's 90 degrees and everyone's air conditioning's running, or in the real cold of winter when there's a lot of energy usage too. We're seeing price spikes there that could really affect our ratepayers. So there's a couple flashing warning lights on the dashboard right now that we have to take action on. And incentivizing the use of battery storage for energy can be a really big part of that. As you mentioned, it's something that I've been working on for a couple years. And here's how it would work. The batteries can charge up at times of low demand. They can pull electricity off the grid, store it, and then dispatch it when it is really needed on those days where it's really hot, on those days where it's really cold, or at times when our renewable sources of energy are not producing any power, when the wind isn't blowing and turning windmills, when the sun isn't shining and giving power to solar panels. Batteries can step in at those moments, and we're trying to incentivize the development of batteries in Illinois. We think that will be a benefit both in short-term and long-term to our ratepayers.
So when we're talking about batteries, often with clean energy, it's not, if people think of batteries, they think of their 2 AA's they're putting in the back of their TV remote. Or I'm curious what this actually looks like to you when we're talking about clean energy and the storage of this here. Is this, we have a wind farm in a field in central Illinois, and some of those turbines will have battery packs on them to store some of that energy? Or is this a much larger field itself, a whole facility itself designed just for these batteries and this energy storage?
Yeah, the answer to that, Cole, is both. We will see storage development at the site of renewable projects to store the energy those windmills and solar panels generate. But what we'll also see are separate storage facilities, electricity storage facilities set up in places like, for instance, abandoned fossil fuel plants, coal plants, gas plants that have shut down. They're on the grid. It's really easy to access their connection to the grid. So what we'll see are the companies that own those closed power stations set up an array of batteries. And they're basically boxes that look like storage containers you would see on a train or on a truck. That's kind of what they look like. And they would put a whole array of these together at those former plants. And at times when the energy costs are low, they will pull power off the grid, store it there, hold it until demand is high, and then dispatch that energy. That's the way it'll work. It's ideal to be paired with renewable generation, but it doesn't have to be. Storage can exist on its own and be there when we need it.
I'm curious at how this works. We've seen a growing push in the Capitol we saw the moratorium on nuclear power get lifted. Is this something that strictly has to go to solar and wind, or can this be used for other energy sources if the state does make those turns and starts to rely on some more of those alternate options?
Yeah, the energy that the batteries would store is resource neutral. The energy to charge up those batteries could come from a nuke plant. It could come from a fossil fuel plant. Ideally, it would come from wind and solar, but it doesn't have to. As we go on, I think it's a major part as we move all the way to renewable energy. Battery storage is really a crucial part of that. Renewable energy generation will not work without battery storage in any meaningful way. We won't be able to hit our transition goals that have been set up by CEJA. So that's why it's crucial we kickstart that right now with an incentive program to get developers to come to our state and put in storage facilities.
The ultimate question that everything, especially this year, all of this is going to come down to is how much does it cost? I'm curious how your bill goes about funding these kinds of projects. You're already talking about some increases to electricity and energy bills just from the fact that of these issues that already exist. Where do you see this how do you see the money playing out?
So the way we incentivize renewable development is by putting an extra charge on electrical bills and then using that to support the development of renewables. The battery proposal would follow the same sort of formula. My proposals would probably mean a very small increase in what ratepayers pay. We're talking about maybe 20, 50 cents a month on the front end. But on the back end, there will be much larger savings. You have to look at this through sort of a basic supply and demand lens, okay? When you charge up these batteries, you do it when the price is low, okay? And then when you dispatch the energy, you do it when the price is high. Right now, at high demand times, the costs are very high demand, high costs. Storage, which can enter the market at those times, is much cheaper than the other generation forms that are used by our grid operators at high demand times. So that will bring down what we call the capacity prices. And so there is some small cost up front, but there's a big cost on the back end. A study was commissioned by someone who used to work at the ICC on this earlier this year. He showed that over a 20-year period, having robust storage could save ratepayers over $2 billion over that time. So this is something that is going to add to grid reliability, make sure the lights go on and our air conditioners run when we need them to, and over the long term, over a 20-year cost curve, going to save ratepayers billions of dollars.
Can I ask, just bring up a comparison here? Definitely not around clean energy, I guess, but it sounds like this is like when you hear about the president releasing a whole bunch of barrels of oil from the U.S.'s reserves to when prices are really high to try to bring them back down. Is that a fair comparison?
It is absolutely on target.
All right, well, Senator Bill Cunningham, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. Joining us now is David Goldenberg, the Midwest Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So this week, you and a broad coalition of different groups, advocacy groups, joined together to talk about a bill that could have passed in the Capitol last spring but didn't make it through. Now you're hoping to see it pass in lame duck session. This bill, tell me a little bit about exactly how this would approach the problem, the growing problem of hate crimes in Illinois.
Absolutely. Well, SB 3552 has unanimously passed the Senate. It's unanimously passed the House Judiciary Committee. All we need right now is for the full House to pass it and send it to the governor for his signature. This bill would make Illinois the 15th state in the country to require hate crimes training and education on an ongoing basis for law enforcement across the state. We have tracked a significant, and not just ADL, but actually the FBI has tracked a significant increase in hate crimes across the country and also here in the state of Illinois, particularly over the last 10 years, to the point that 2023 was a 22-year high in the number of hate crimes recorded here in Illinois and also across the country. We believe that it is absolutely critical for law enforcement to have the necessary skills and education and tools for them to support victims of hate crime and ensure that they are properly investigated and ultimately prosecuted.
When we talk about that rise and the record high of hate crimes in 2023, is that across a broad, diverse population, or are these specifically targeted? And you held a press conference earlier this week where you talked about there had actually been a decline since the early 2000s when we saw a lot of the Islamophobia that stemmed from 9/11. And I'm curious how, when we're seeing these numbers climb up again, are these targeted or are they really broad in how these crimes are recorded?
Yeah, so I would say yes and yes. And by that I mean from the height of 2001, which is where we saw this dramatic spike in attacks against members of the Muslim community in the aftermath of 9/11, it was on the decline all the way down till 2014, 2015. And beginning in 2015, we started to see a steady uptick. We hit COVID and it shot through the roof. And to put things in perspective, we're talking about back in 2001, we're talking about approximately 8,300 hate crimes recorded in the United States. Fast forward to 2014, where the FBI recorded around 5,500. To 2023, over 11,800 hate crimes. So we're talking about over a 9-year span, a more than doubling in the number of hate crimes recorded here in the United States. In Illinois, just over the last 5 years, we've seen a more than 300% increase in the number of hate crimes that we've tracked. And the reality is, it is targeted communities across the board. We have certainly seen spikes, whether it be during COVID, targeting members of the AAPI community. We've seen a dramatic spike targeting members of the Jewish community and the Muslim community, particularly after Hamas's October 7th attack against Israel. Or in the last few years, we've seen a huge uptick in the number of hate crimes targeting members of the trans and LGBTQ community over identity-based hate crimes.
Let's talk about the bill a little bit more. This focuses on law enforcement training, the recognition and the ability to handle hate crimes when they're committed. And I'm curious when we're talking about the law enforcement preparation side of this, how does the lack of training affect the policing and the prevention of hate crimes? How does that correlate?
Yeah. I think it's important first to note that this bill really mirrors and attempts to codify a recommendation of the Governor's Commission on Discrimination and Hate Crimes, which I'm proud to serve on, and IDHR's director of the Illinois Department of Human Rights Director Jim Bennett actually chairs, and he was with us on Monday. After more than 18 months of exploring best practices around the country, we realized that despite Illinois having one of the most comprehensive and earliest hate crimes laws in the country, we still didn't require law enforcement to become trained. And the result and the impact, getting to your question, is that we know that law enforcement, they are first responders. They want to support victims, but that doesn't mean that it's intuitive to them on how to do it. The other piece about it is that when you start looking at the difference between what we could say is a traditional or regular assault versus a hate crime, we start getting at the motive and the intention of the individual who's committing that crime. Why did they do it? Did they call out a derogatory or a racist term before hurting the individual? What was their motive behind it? Was it because of the individual's identity? Helping law enforcement and giving them the tools necessary to know what questions should they ask, what things should they be listening for, how can they ultimately take a victim-first and victim-centric approach, and not ensuring that it's not just in our large cities, but frankly, it's across the entire state. We know that when this has occurred, it can help build trust between law enforcement and communities who have been historically attacked.
So all of that victim first mentality that you were talking about there, this isn't as much, it's obviously both parts, but this is more so about making sure the victims in a hate crime are able to get the help that would adequately address the problems that they're facing at that moment compared to the increased policing around this particular incident.
This bill is not about policing. This bill is about supporting victims and ensuring that when you conduct that initial investigation, you are exhausting sort of the questions to ensure that this wasn't just a regular assault. In the event that if it was fueled by somebody's identity, that we have put into place the right questions and the right practices so that if it should be further investigated as a possible hate crime, that law enforcement has that ability to do it. This has nothing to do about policing. This is about responding to a particular incident or a crime.
Got it. You mentioned that the governors, I believe the coalition working on these issues recommended this. We know that State Police Director Brendan Kelly has had a hand in crafting this bill, and that the Illinois Law Enforcement Standards and Training Board is also on board with this passing. David Goldenberg with the Anti-Defamation League, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
That will do it for us on this week's episode of Capital Connection. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again next week. For Capital Connection, I'm Cole Hank.